Good afternoon. My name is Andrew McDonald. This is my cultural influence on education for the class Education and Globalization. First of all, I'd like to talk about my school, immigration in private schools, the impact on my education, how this relates to the text, and then finally the citations of my presentation. So we'll just begin. A little background. I never attended a public school, so a lot of the findings and research we've been studying in the book, Learning a New Land, I have not seen firsthand because I never experienced it. So my high school is a little different. It was private. Frankly, it was wealthy, and I'm just going to call it as I see it. It was mostly white. That's just the way it was, for better or for worse. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to not be referring to my high school by its name. I'm just going to refer to it in the general sense. But that was my high school, and that obviously doesn't fit the criteria of the public schools we were looking at in the LISA study, for example, and some of the other studies. But I do have a story to tell. There was a friend of mine who was an immigrant. His father actually worked at the school, at my high school, and I believe he attended the high school for free, which was just something my high school had offered him. You know, you're working here, let your son go here for free, and he was in my grade. And I'd like to talk about his background and how that relates to my own understanding of it. Just going back. Immigration in private school. There's a couple of things that frankly differed. Number one was the language. The two, traditions, and third, the family involvement. Starting off with language, this is a pretty obvious one. He was the only real immigrant in my grade. And so language was a barrier. He was Hispanic. He spoke mostly Spanish. And his English was all right. It wasn't great, though. So he struggled with that. It was difficult. The traditions. He came from mostly an Hispanic background, hardworking people. His parents were immigrants. I believe he was born in the United States. But his traditions were mostly different from the traditions of the rest of the Caucasian class. He celebrated, for instance, Cinco de Mayo, maybe things that we don't really put much thought to. His culture had a big impact on him in those ways, where he celebrated those traditions. And thirdly, family involvement. I believe his family was perhaps less involved in his education. Most of the school, most of their families and all the students, everybody's parents were hard on them. Everybody's parents. Very involved in the school. They would come and they'd help set up for certain events. And they were very involved in the homework, and most of the kids got very good grades. It was frankly a prestigious high school. And I don't believe that was the case for him. I don't believe his parents necessarily understood, the value of doing that. Or it was, culturally different, where he would have to work it out on his own to sort of build that up. But those are some of the things that that differed from his background in regards to the rest of the class. So you might be asking, well, what impact does this have on my education? It seems to be a story of one of my friends who saw it a different way and was an immigrant to the United States. Well, there are such things as the protective factors. In regards to him, his protective factors were he didn't go to a school where there was low income. There was virtually no poverty at my high school. He was surrounded by the best resources. And I'll get back to that in a minute, how those best resources were more formed towards a student of perhaps a higher GPA and grew up with different understanding of the education they were getting. But the protective factors were all there, but not to say they didn't outweigh the risk factors. Risk factors, in his case, were that I don't believe his parents gave much thought towards his education. There was various relational and behavioral factors that also involved The fact that at home, I'm not so sure his parents ever checked in. How's homework going? Algebra 1, that's a hard class. Let me help you. I don't believe his parents actually received the education. I'm not sure if they could help. So that's difficult. That's very difficult for somebody like that. And I'm going to round it out at the end, but those risk factors are very strong, and I believe they outweighed the protective factors. There's also the insider-outsider status. Very clearly, I'm not going to call it, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He was an outsider. He came from a different background, a very different culture than the rest of us. It was something that we all had to understand. And you know what? There were people, of course, in every school, there were people who made fun of him because he was Hispanic, lower income than perhaps their own family. And it was disappointing to see. Teacher expectations. Teacher expectations at my high school were very high. It was very difficult to get into, and some of these were students were expected to be highly disciplined. They were expected to be very fluent in English, hardworking, and athletic. My friend, through his background, perhaps was less disciplined. He certainly wasn't fluent in English. I believe he's hardworking. I don't believe, I think he struggled to apply that demeanor towards his academics. But I do believe he was hardworking, and he was semi-athletic. That was just the culture of the high school, was that these were expectations of everybody. The bar was set very, very high, and I don't think, looking back, I don't think our school was the best choice for him. I believe that if he had went to a school that was more capable of catering to his academic needs, that perhaps he would have received a better education. That being said, he did graduate with us, and that was something our school worked closely with him to make sure that happened. Text connections. How does this connect to what we're learning right now? Well, academic self-efficacy. I believe I'm saying that correctly. It's going to be pretty embarrassing if I'm not. Academic self-efficacy. He didn't believe in himself. And that was something, I tried to pump him up for. Hey, you've got a test tomorrow in math. Let's sit down. Is there anything you don't understand? He didn't feel very confident really going into the tests, the various homeworks, that he was doing anything correctly. Kind of got swept under the rug, as they say. It's emotional well-being. It's difficult to get picked on. There were times where he'd have fun. I was one of his friends. I still try to keep up with him. He had a couple of friends at school, but it was very easy for the people to pick on him just due to, again, that insider-outsider relationship and the fact that, frankly, kids are mean. If they see somebody that doesn't fit the criteria or the standard that they're used to, they're going to make fun of them. And that, I believe it did have a pretty significant impact, unfortunately. Just an unfortunate type scenario. And then attitudes towards school. He never grew up with the attitudes that academics are number one. It was sort of a notion of, okay, did I pass this class? I did. That's it. C's get degrees type deal. And this really sort of woke me up into my own education. Seeing this really, it makes you, you take for granted what you really have, in regards to school. That your parents are able to send you here and you're able to get this education. And my parents are very, very difficult on me. That's something I'll get into perhaps another time. But again, the academic self-efficacy, the emotional well-being, and the attitudes towards school really affected his relational engagement in the material and in school. So getting back to my education, this directly affected me. Seeing this, his different culture in regards and perhaps separation of my culture, I've taken away a couple of things. Some of those, don't take your education for granted, number one. Number two, help with emotional well-being. And that should go unsaid. You see one of your friends struggling, he's having a rough day, perhaps he didn't do well on a math quiz. an English quiz. Go out of your way, maybe buy him lunch, help him out. Hey man, let's sit down. You need help? Yeah man, I can help you out. That's just, in my opinion, that's being a good person, and I don't think you need to be told to be a good person. Number 3, help with attitudes towards school. This is something that kind of ties in with the emotional well-being. Like I just said, hey, you know what? You got a big test coming up in 3 days. Let's start studying now. Let's get that going. And then when he does well, good job, man. Let's go out for lunch. Bring him out. Really celebrate. I believe personally in positive reinforcement. I believe in more of a carrot approach and less the stick. And then academic self-efficacy. Again, building that confidence of, hey, I can do this. If I put in hard work, I can get good grades. And yeah, sometimes you're going to put in hard work and you're not going to get a good grade, and that's just the way life goes. That's a valuable lesson to learn as well. And, as much as I'd like to say our teachers really prepared him for that, I think they were lacking in some of their understanding of the culture. They really were. They catered more towards go-getters and very serious, successful people, and people who grew up in a very strict academic scenario. You didn't necessarily have the same cultural background or academic experience that he did. This also relates through A Step from Heaven. We've just gone over through it, how it relates to learning from a new land. But A Step from Heaven, my immigrant friend reminded me of Young Ju, of course. And for the need to be more open and understanding of others' cultures. Young Ju goes off to class. She doesn't know English. Granted, she's in a very young environment, but the fact that students, made what they called fuzzies when she said her brother died, that turned out to be a lie. Regardless, class coming together, Young Ju, a new immigrant, doesn't speak the language, opening up and including her and trying to understand where she's coming from and her culture. Huge culture shock for a very young girl. It's very difficult. And then creating an environment for success, I believe. Going out of your way and trying to help them. There's no reason we shouldn't see everybody being successful. Going out of your way and helping others. It's a very simple, concept, coming back to it. And so that's my cultural influence on education. Through my friend who is an immigrant, seeing the way he traversed through a private high school, which one would say, look, you have an opportunity to attend this school. Take it. Take the bull by the horns. That's a great opportunity. You might not be able to get very often. For free. But looking back on it, I'm not so sure that we had the correct resources to really develop and understand the cultural background where he came from. There's sort of a high expectation, and understanding where he's coming from was difficult for a lot of faculty. And it was just sort of expected that he'd be at the correct math level, and he'd be at the correct English level. And his vocabulary and his grammar was all correct. Those type things. And, he struggled a lot with that. I tried to help him out throughout the year, and you know what? We were very happy. I was happy to see him graduate. He went on right along with everybody else. And that was a sort of a powerful thing to see at the end of the 4 years. That, hey man, you did it. It feels good, you can celebrate. Let's kick back. Let's relax. That hard work sort of pays off. In addition, here are the citations I've cited. Learning a New Land and A Step from Heaven. Thank you for watching my cultural presentation, and my cultural influence on education, and letting me share that story of my immigrant friend traversing through a different scenario, one that his friends definitely, or probably didn't receive. All right. Thanks for tuning in.